everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be doing my June wrap-up. June was a bit of a unique month for me because I actually had made a June TBR. I didn't go back and double check the books that I read against the books that I had on the TBR, but as I could have predicted, I don't think the ratio of books I said I was going to read to books that I actually ended up reading was very high. So I apologize if you got really excited for the TBR video and had a bunch of books you wanted to hear me talk about. I don't make TBR videos very often because I know what my reading habits are like, and that is to say that they are eclectic and varying and they change very quickly. So I apologize about that. I did read some of the books that I had on that list, which I was really happy about. And another thing is that I read a lot of these books on Kindle, so I will pop a picture of them up. But I have my book journal, which is something that I've been doing for a long time, book journaling. So I'm just going to read the titles off of that because I don't have a nice stack of physical books to draw from in order to talk through the TBR. So that means that I will talk about the books in the order that they're written here, with the exception is I'll try to group up the series that I read. But this past month in June was the Shelf Space Readathon, and I had 16 books on my TBR because there were 16 prompts in that readathon. I had really hoped that I would be able to read 16 books. I usually read between 8 and 12 depending on the month, and I didn't think it would be too hard to push myself to read 16. But unfortunately, I did have a personal loss this month, which was really difficult for my family and led to some really busy times and some days where it was a little bit harder to read. So again, and I did this in the last video I recorded because I'm recording a bunch in a row right now, and thanked Patrick for being really supportive during that time. He also introduced me to Haikyuu, the volleyball sports anime, which I have been totally and completely obsessed with and has taken over a lot of my time and was a very good distraction. So I was very thankful for that this month. And also a big thanks to all of my booktube friends who are in the Dragonlance read-along because they have also been very supportive, very kind, and kind of checking in on me throughout this month. So I was really, really grateful for that. But I did still manage to read 13 books this month. A lot of it was front loaded. So I read a lot of books very early in the month. And then as things got very busy and a little bit difficult at the end of the month, I was reading much less. But I still really enjoyed all the books that I read. I also just got back from a vacation to see my sister. And my family went with me and we had a really great time. We went whale watching. I have a whale phobia. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that on the channel before, but through some cosmic punishment, I ended up with two kids who are absolutely and totally obsessed with whales. I think it might be because they're a little bit evil and they know that I am scared of them, and so that made it all the more attractive to them. But they really wanted to go whale watching last summer, and I felt like I had to pump myself up to get ready for it. And we went this past weekend, and it was actually really fun. The whales came out, so I was really glad that my kids got to see them, but they stayed far enough away that I didn't get too scared. One swam under the boat once, which was a difficult moment for me, but I made it through, and otherwise it was a really great day. I did get sunburned, so if I look particularly red in this video, then I apologize. But yeah, it was a good time. That's why I haven't had as many videos up in the last week. But I am going to give you a little run through of the books that I read in June, and hopefully you guys will enjoy. Like I said, I'll try to go kind of chronologically, but I will group the series together. So just looking here at my notebook, the first books that I read this month were the second, third, and fourth Greatcoats books. So I did a series review / why you should read for the Greatcoats series that I can link below if you haven't seen it or you would like to watch it. But I had I think the first or the second book in the Greatcoats series put on my June TBR. But as it happens with me, I got super invested in that series really quickly, and so read them all back to back and had a wonderful time. I was really happy to chat with Alan from the Library of Alexandria about it because he is very passionate about that series. And it was so much fun. The books themselves were fun, but talking to Alan and kind of sharing our reactions about major moments in the story made the reading experience even more rewarding, and I had such a great time. I loved every second of it. I really loved that series. If you like adventure / heroic / swashbuckling fantasy, then most definitely give them a try. I personally think that the first book is a little weaker than the second, third, and fourth. So if you've tried it and didn't really feel super in love with the first book, I'd still recommend that you continue with the series because it just gets better and better. The second book that I read was actually a graphic novel, and that was called The Daughters of Ys. And this was a graphic novel. I would probably call it a YA graphic novel because the two characters who star in it are two sisters. This is a retelling, I think, of Celtic folklore, a story within Celtic folklore. And it follows two daughters who are princesses, and they live on an island that their father has, along with their mother, who was some sort of goddess, have brought into being. And there is kind of a dark undercurrent on this island, and we're not really sure where that darkness or that kind of feeling of something malevolent comes from. And we follow two princesses, two daughters of the king, who are mourning the loss of their mother at the beginning of the book. So that happens like kind of first pages, so not a spoiler, but they're mourning the loss of their mother, and they both have very different personalities. And so we follow each of them as they grow up, as they live on the island, as they build a life around themselves, and see how they interact with their father, how they interact with each other, how they interact with the island. The artwork in this was beautiful. It was a very short graphic novel. It is a kind of a standalone graphic novel if that's something that you're interested in. And I really, really love the story. And I thought that there was a lot of potential depth. But unfortunately, I felt like the writing and the way that the story was told in the graphic novel fell a little bit short of my expectations. It is difficult to piece together a story in a standalone graphic novel. It can be very difficult. Now, there are lots of people who do it very well. There are standalone graphic novels that I absolutely love. But I did think that a little bit more could have been done, especially with the sisters' relationship with each other. So this is not one that I loved, unfortunately, but I am glad that I read it. And I think that for a teenager who's just getting into maybe some stories with darker themes, it would be an excellent read. After that, I'm just gonna flip my page here. After that, I read a bunch of books from the Dresden Files. So I read books 2, 3, and 4 of the Dresden Files, which are Full Moon, Grave Peril, and Summer Night. So Dresden is a series that I started a really long time ago. I'm gonna say like 15 years ago, I read the first Dresden book because one of my good friends from high school, who had shared a lot of similar tastes in fantasy and who was also a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, which I was a diehard fan of those shows when they were on TV, and I still rewatch them now, so still a big fan. But he had likened it to that vibe, that same urban fantasy, paranormal fantasy that had that baddie of the week vibe with kind of an underlying theme or an underlying story that was coming together. And so I picked up the first book at his recommendation, and I didn't really like it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really like it, and so I didn't continue with the series. Fast forward to coming onto BookTube, and I hear so much about how the series builds, how much people enjoy it, how much growth there is in Harry Dresden's character, how the world and the story becomes bigger and bigger. And so I decided to give it another try. So I reread the first book, Stormfront, a couple months ago, and then this month I read the second book, Full Moon. And again, I liked but didn't love them. So then I decided, because I had heard so many people say great things about the audiobooks, I decided to try book 3, Grave Peril, on audio. And I loved it. I love James Marsters' narration. For one thing, whenever he does the voice for Bob the Skull, who is one of the secondary characters that kind of pops up once or twice every book, his British accent gives me Spike vibes from Buffy. So that always makes me really happy. And I just think he does a really good job. Some of Harry Dresden's thoughts, some of his interactions, I personally find to be a little bit silly, or I guess it's that kind of campy feel that you get from these pulpy detective novels. But somehow when James Marsters narrates it, there's that self-deprecating edge that comes to life a little bit more for me than it did when I was reading the books physically. Now, book 3, Grave Peril, was definitely my favorite of the 4 that I have read so far. But I have to say that I am enjoying the way that the story's progressing and kind of coming together. I think I will probably put a video together when I have read the first 5. So I would say after this month, because I'm sure I'll pick up book 5 this month, I will do a video on having discontinued Dresden and then come back to Dresden and give some of my thoughts, predictions, hopes, and hopefully get to chat with some people who are fans of the series, because I know that there are a lot of people out there. But I really enjoyed the audiobooks of these, and I am not someone who typically enjoys fiction on audio. It's usually I go to audio for my nonfiction, but because the Dresden audiobooks sucked me in so much this month, I didn't even get to a work of nonfiction because all of my audio time was taken by listening to Dresden, which is a choice that I am very happy with. Outside the Dresden books, I also read The Hand of the Sun King this month. Which is a 2021 release, and I did a full review for that book as well. So I will link that review below. Just to give you a small blurb, this is a work of fantasy that follows a young man who lives in a country that has been occupied by this outside force, this colonizing force that's kind of taking over the whole continent. There are countries in various states of colonization, and this young man is intent on finding a way to use magic, is essentially his driving force or his driving motivation. And the way to rise in this society is to ace an entrance exam, or I guess it's almost like a professional exam. You take it and then the government tells you where you belong or what you can do. So a lot of the book is taken up with him studying for this exam. And then once he receives his results, he follows a specific path in life. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, but if you would like to know more about this book, then you can feel free to watch that review. I liked this book. I liked it a lot, actually. I liked the character. It was a much slower paced fantasy novel. It was very focused on this one particular character. The secondary characters I thought fell a bit flat, which is what kept me from really bumping this up into, oh my gosh, I loved it territory. But I know that Patrick really loved it. So if this is a book that has been interesting you, then I can leave his review linked below, because I know that he definitely gushed about it and really, really loved it. So that would probably be a good place for you to go if you wanted to hear more about that one. The next book that I read was one of my neglected kings. So I talked in previous videos about kind of catching up on my backlog of Stephen King novels. So this month I read Firestarter, which is a book that follows a young girl who's 7 turning 8, I believe, named Charlie, and her father as they flee from a secret government organization. So Charlie's father had been involved in some experimentation in university. He joined an open study and was paid $200 to take part in this study, where he was injected with medications that were supposed to spark psychic abilities in people. And so that investigation was shut down. None of the subjects seemed to really show a lot of promise. But then Andy, one of the girl's father, got married to one of the other people from within that experiment, and together they had a daughter who turns out to have some very powerful, very sinister abilities. And so this is kind of like a thriller / paranormal fantasy that follows Charlie and her dad as they flee from this government organization. I really liked this. I don't read a lot of thrillers because I don't like that. While I like fast-paced books, sometimes I feel like thrillers are all about the plot. They're so plot-driven that we don't get a lot about the characters. But because this is Stephen King, and because I think that Stephen King writes some of the best characters in all of literature, I think that we did actually get a healthy dose of character development here, and that's what made me enjoy this book. If you're looking for something to break up some of the kind of heavier fantasy in your TBR, I think this is a great palate cleanser. I believe I even included it on my palate cleanser video, but I had a great time reading this one. If you like reading about kind of parent-child relationships, if you like that paranormal side to fantasy, if you like where fantasy meets thrillers, then I think this would be a really good choice for you to pick up. Next, I read, actually, this is a work of nonfiction. I just didn't listen to it via audio. I read World of Wonders, which is a book that I talked about, I think, in a 5-star predictions video, and I ended up really enjoying this. This is a book that's written by a poet whose name is escaping me right now, but I will pop the book up on the screen. And she writes about some of her life experiences, about growing up, about how life changes, the nostalgia you feel for your youth, and a lot about her own personal interactions with nature. And all of these reflections are broken up by chapter, and each chapter follows a specific either plant or animal. So she will relate an experience she had with her family that connected to fireflies in a chapter about fireflies. Or there will be a particular plant maybe that was on the campus where her mother worked, and that will bring back memories, and she will reflect on how her mother's job impacted her life and the kind of family that they had. And the writing here was beautiful. There were some very poignant stories, some very poignant reflections in this book. It was very, very short. An excellent book, I think, if you do like nonfiction, if you like poetry because the language is very poetic, if you enjoy nature, which I really do, I like reading nonfiction that's centered around nature and how we interact with the natural world, then I would definitely recommend picking this up. It is so short. You can read it in a very quick setting, but I think that it's very worthwhile. There's not... this is not something where you're going to get kind of progression of character or anything like that. It's really just one woman's reflections on her life, the person that she is, the people who made her that way, and how nature fit into all of that. I thought it was really lovely. I had a great time reading it. And like I said, it didn't take up too much time at all. Next, another series continuation that I read this month was Reaper Man, which is the second death book in the Discworld series. So I had wanted to start Discworld for a long time, and based on some videos that I had watched, I felt like the death series was the one that was going to appeal to me the most. So I read the first book, Mort, last month, and I picked up the second book, Reaper Man, this month, and I really, really enjoyed it. I liked Mort. I didn't like it as much as I thought I was going to, and that left me feeling a little bit disappointed, and I was worried that I wasn't going to enjoy the series as much as I had wanted. But Reaper Man was fantastic. The basic premise of Reaper Man is that the higher-ups are starting to feel that death is developing emotions. And so they push him into kind of a forced retirement, and he goes to work on a farm. And this kind of throws the natural order of things into chaos. So we are following Death on his misadventures, and also a group of wizards on their misadventures. And these stories are related in various ways. And it was everything that I was hoping Mort was going to be. I thought it was really funny. It was really clever. I really enjoyed the writing, and I just really liked the plot of this one. In Mort, I felt like I liked what I was reading, but I didn't ever feel particularly compelled to pick it up and kind of keep going. But with Reaper Man, I always wanted to be reading it. I enjoyed it so much. The character of Death became so much more enjoyable for me. I liked him so much more than I did in Mort, and now I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of this series. Similar to how I said I was going to wait until I got through 5 books to tackle talking about Dresden on the channel, I do want to read the string of death books before I do. I don't think I'm going to do individual reviews for each book. I would rather just talk about the death books as a whole, but I will be hopefully making my way through them quickly, and I really hope that I enjoy the rest of them as much. If you have read the death books, could you let me know which of them you enjoyed the most? Because I want to know what to look forward to and which ones I think I'm going to like, but I really, really loved Reaper Man. Those are all the books that I have written down because I'm a little bit behind in my book journal. But the other two books that I read this month, one of them was The Wastelands, in preparation for the discussion that I was honored to take part in on Philip Chase's channel. Rereading The Wastelands, which is book 3 of the Dark Tower series, was a great experience. I hadn't reread The Wastelands since I was a kid, basically. So I was a young kid when I read that for the first time. And I have reread various other books within the series, either like for when book 5 came out, I reread book 4 because there had been such a gap between them. And then I have reread parts of the last books to kind of refresh me on what happened. I've read the first 2 books many, many times. I've read The Gunslinger the most of all of them. But I hadn't ever reread The Wastelands. And it was a very different experience reading it as an adult than as a child. I feel like there are a lot of literary allusions, besides the obvious like wasteland reference to the poem. There are other literary allusions that definitely went over my head as a kid because they were simply things that I had not read. I feel like The Wastelands, after having read it, is kind of a blend of the first 2 books. So we have The Gunslinger, which is this very weird, atmospheric, character-driven book. And then we have The Drawing of the Three, which is a very action-packed, fast-paced adventure story. And I think that The Wastelands takes the great parts of both of those books and melds them together. So I think it's a fantastic entry to the Dark Tower. It has made me really excited to continue on this reread. So I will certainly be picking up Wizard and Glass, which I remember as my favorite. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't. It's so hard for me to pick a favorite. I love The Gunslinger. I love The Drawing of the Three. I love Wizard. I love them all. I love them all. But I really, really liked Wizard and Glass. I hadn't really realized it was polarizing until spending some time on Mike's Discord, where a lot of people don't like it because it does incorporate some flashback elements. But I remember really loving it. I don't know if that will also change because I was a teenager when I read that book, versus an adult now, but I'm so looking forward to getting to it and continuing my reread of The Dark Tower in general. And then the last book that I read for the month was actually a book that I read with my daughter, and that is called Cecerios and the Desert of Souls. And this is a middle grade fantasy novel. If you have a young child, and probably especially a young daughter, I would highly, highly recommend reading this book with them. This was a debut middle grade fantasy novel. It follows a young girl named Cece who lives in a desert that is populated by criaturas. So they're they're kind of an amalgamation of animals and people. So they have animalistic characteristics. So for example, there's a coyote who has coyote ears and glowing eyes and claws, but is otherwise humanoid. And they're all of these criaturas that live in the desert are all humanoid in various fashions. And basically the premise of the book is that her sister is stolen by one of the dark criaturas, or one of the ones who are antagonistic towards humans. And the main character, Cece, feels like she needs to become a bruja, or someone who can control the souls of these criaturas and use them for their own purposes, so that she can rescue her sister. And this is very hard for Cece because she is a very gentle person and she does not necessarily want to take over the soul of one of these other people, essentially. And so she's caught between wanting to save her sister and staying true to herself. And it incorporates a lot of elements of folklore. It has a very fun magic system. There's a great sisterly bond between the two characters. And I had a great time reading this. I don't know. It's probably not a middle grade story that I would have gone for if I hadn't been reading it with my daughter, because I tend to go for more of the timeless, whimsical middle grade stories that I feel like are super accessible to all ages. This one feels like a story for young kids, but I had a fantastic time reading it with her. So if you have a young reader in your life, or if you like reading with your kids, I would highly recommend this one. My daughter is 7, and I thought that this was fine for her, but there is some violence in it. So I always suggest that you check out and kind of go with what is comfortable for you. I feel pretty comfortable reading most things that are geared towards children. I'm not going to read like the first law with my 7-year-old, but I feel comfortable with a variety of topics as long as we can talk about it as we're reading, and I just kind of gauge her level of comfort as we go through. But it was a lovely, lovely story. I had a great time reading that with her. But that is the wrap up for the month of June. I will go back and look at the TBR and just pop up the number of books that I read out of the ones that I said I was going to read. It's probably really embarrassing, but regardless, I felt like it was a really good reading month. I really enjoyed everything that I read. There was nothing that I read this month that was disappointing or that I wished I hadn't gotten to. And I hope that I can feel that way about every month. I have a new favorite series, which is the Greatcoats. So it was really, really excellent all around. I am going to roll a lot of the 2021 releases that I had been hoping to read in June into July, because I would really like to put together a video recommending some of those books to all of you and letting you know which of the 2021 releases I feel are must reads or immediate reads. But if you are interested in any of the books I talked about today, if you've read any of them and you want to chat about them, then please let me know, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye.